Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story TV and the Her Story podcast. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And my co-host, the beautiful Ruth Dengwani, is coming to us all the way from Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing, Ruth?
I am well. How are you, Sisketi?
I am good. Please give everybody a quick recap on what this show is about, what we're trying to achieve before we get started.
Thank you. So the show is it's called Power of Education, and what we are driving is ending child marriages, child abuse in any form, and just dealing with an evil incident or tragic event that happened in Zimbabwe, where Memory Machaya or Anna Machaya was giving birth. She was 14 years old and was giving birth at one of the shrines in Marange, and she died in childbirth. And we've come together as women, as mothers, as sisters, as aunts, as even the girls that are being abused. Because if you've been following on social media, you see that there've been videos even of small little girls as young as 3, 5, 6 that have joined and put their voices to this cause. So we are here just trying to find practical ways and strategies on how we can end this act and this practice. What role can we play? Just using our voices and even using practical projects and means of approaching this problem, working obviously with the authorities and the elders and the different leaders, yeah, in the society, and just trying to come up with workable solutions and saying enough is enough. So we've been at this show, this is our ninth episode, and
Mhm.
we are glad to say that we've made some progress, a lot of progress, and things I'm sure will be coming together very soon, and we'll keep you updated and communicate with you on what's happening.
Awesome. Thank you for that recap, Ruth. So, the reason why we called the show The Power of Education is that we realize that if one is educated, especially if you are a woman, you can go very, very far in life. Unfortunately, in some of these communities, little girls are pulled out of school from the age of 9, 10, 11, and they get married off to older men. Now, if a child is educated, if a woman is educated, number one, she knows her rights, she knows how to use her voice, she can be self sufficient, she can look after herself, and she doesn't have to rely on being married to survive. Unfortunately, the mothers of these little girls are abused women themselves. A lot of them were married off young, same as what will happen to their daughters. And so we're trying to find strategies to meet them where they're at and see how we can help them reframe how life can be without the necessity of being married. So, we're going to look at the different types of child abuse that are happening in some of these communities. One of the biggest things that we have been hearing time and time again is incest. Now, a lot of times, the child is threatened not just by the abuser, but by family members as well. The shame associated with having this go public forces people to suppress a child who wants to report being abused by a family member. Sometimes it's happening with a father, an uncle, a brother, a close family member, and the shame associated with incest makes people want to suppress the child speaking up.
Mm.
Let's talk a little bit about this, Ruth. We heard the other day a similar story of a young woman who was being abused by her own father and talking to her mom, and her mother telling her never to say this in public. So, how does one get around incest relationships in our communities?
The incestuous relationships or abuse has been happening for a very long time, because you always hear stories of when a niece went to stay with an uncle, with an aunt, and then the uncle ended up abusing her, and then he's forced to marry her even if she's underage. Or a brother is staying with his sister, and then he abuses the sister's daughter. You know, such kind of stories. And then the families come together and they try to cover this up. So
Yeah.
the child goes and tells the mother or goes and tells the aunt because it's the person that they know and they trust. And then they are told to never to talk about it,
Talk
never tell
about it.
anyone about it. And now the child is fearful to go outside the home and find somebody else to confide in, or to report this case. And it's so sad because our children trust us, the primary caregivers, they trust the primary caregivers. So once we tell them that never talk about it, they trust that we know better, we know best, and then don't share it. And sadly, you find 30-year-old women, 35-year-old women, or even 50-year-olds coming out and say, I was abused by my
Mm.
uncle, or I was abused by my father. So
Thank you,
in terms of,
Ruth.
thank you, Gary.
we,
And we're
we've
seeing
been
Yarudo is back.
I was going to introduce our guest, and it looks like she's dropped off. We'll see if she comes back on. She said she would be with us for a few minutes. So, for those of you who are listening, feel free to comment through Facebook, through YouTube. We're live streaming this to both platforms. We do love to get our audience's participation. It could be a question, it could just be a reflection on some of the things that we are talking about on the show as well. Please feel free to participate. So, besides incest, there's sexual touching. Yesterday, Deborah shared a story of the head of their church and how he would greet the children and tickle them on the palm.
Mhm,
Those sexual suggestions that people do to children that children tune into for as being wrong.
mhm,
So, touching. Normally, this happens in isolation
mhm,
where the adult finds the child alone, or it can happen in broad daylight where there are other people around and they get away with this because the child is confused. They don't know what's actually going on. Deborah actually brought that up yesterday, and it was an interesting observation because I remember having family members who were like that when I was growing up as
mm.
well.
Yes, I also remember even friends, family friends, and obviously we'll then discuss it as girls. That did that man scratch the inside of your hand? And you're like, yes. And what was that all about? And it
Mm,
seemed to have been an accepted form of abuse that these men just put us through, the girls and the women. So it was a sexual suggestion.
yeah. Yeah. And then when you're so young, you don't know how to deal with it. You don't know
Mhm,
who to talk to. Maybe we should have structures within our schools where
mhm,
there are counselors or even just teachers really paying attention to their students, seeing if something is off with a child who's been coming to school regularly. And if they start behaving differently, just being aware and sensitive that something might be going on at home. Emotional abuse is another huge thing that happens to children. Children are normally put down, they can be called names,
mhm,
they can have their self confidence stripped by the adults in their environments as a way of gaining control over that child. And also shaming the child. We talked about shame the other day. A
mhm,
lot of times, people who have been abused don't talk about it because of the stigma and the
mhm,
shame associated with sexual abuse. So, being aware that
You are muted, Gertrude.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you
Okay.
now.
The next thing I thought we could talk about is the economic abuse that happens in our society. We are talking about people who are living in polygamous relationships where a
Mm-hmm.
man has got two, three, four, five wives and withdrawing just the basic needs from the women as a way of controlling.
Mm.
And it could be something as basic as food, any financial support for the children is another reason why women keep quiet when these things are happening.
I know a lot of women, as I interact with the younger women and we're talking, or even the older women. I think, oh, Kathleen is here. I think as if you read Kathleen's book, she talks about the time that her husband would leave the house, leave them with no food, no money to go and get food for her children. At that time, I think she had two children, and he would just walk out and leave them with no food. So it really it's very what's the word? It's common that
Yeah.
that a man will just wake up and walk out of the house, leaving a wife and kids with nothing to eat, no provision for them to go and get food. And this really then puts the woman in a very difficult position because you're looking at your
Mm,
children, they are hungry, they are crying. When children are hungry, they cry and they are crying, and you can't give them. It's breaking your heart, and it just then just quietens your voice even further. You know, abuse has a way of suppressing our voices.
mm,
If you're abused, your voice just it's taken away. The ability to speak is taken away. So it's a cruel, like all kind of abuse. This is very cruel, not only to the woman but also to the children.
to the children.
Mm.
Welcome, Kathleen. Good to see you back on the show this morning. So, today we decided to touch on the various forms of abuse against children in the home. We've talked a little bit about incest. We've talked about sexual touching or kissing that can happen in isolation or in public, like what we discussed yesterday. We've talked about emotional abuse, and now we're talking about economic abuse. I'd love you to weigh in on this because I know you have firsthand experience in a relationship like this. How did you cope? What was actually happening for you? Give us the backstory.
Yes, good morning,
Good
everyone.
morning.
Yes, um, it was a time of hardship, abuse, emotional abuse, you name it, everything. When you are a mother and you've got children, you have no one to talk to, you have absolutely nothing as according to finances, you won't be having. So in with me, it so happened that I had three children and I didn't have any money to give to the children.
Mm,
And my husband, most of the time, he stayed away because he now had a mistress. So he stayed away most of the time. I was now his mistress instead of being his wife. I was now an option to say, when he wants to dash in, he will dash in. And when he doesn't want to, just stay away. So that means I had nothing, absolutely. But when you look at it, this is what most of us women go through. Because even when I left this marriage and walked away with my three children, and then the fourth one who was the eldest, I realized that I started tracking, going to South Africa to sell. A lot of women that I met along my journey, they were all going through that kind of emotional and trauma abuse and financial abuse. Even for some of them who I noticed there, who had husbands who were working and who were financially stable,
mm,
their husbands just decided not to share that money. So it was the duty for a mother to start going out, tracking all the borders and selling doilies, selling clothes, selling whatever she could find. Some of them, they would even bring nuts from Zimbabwe and sell them in South Africa for a living for their children. So this is something which I really looked at and thought, I went through this and I would also want to share it in my book because a lot of women still up to today, they still go through that. They are not supported financially. It's the mother that does that. But at the end of it, when the children are grown up, it's the husband's child. He now takes over and now starts pushing buttons to the child, especially when it comes to the girl child. So it is quite relevant. When you read my book, you will understand where I came from and what journey I walked through that marriage. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. So, a lot of the fear that comes with the abuse of children, of course, is that most kids are threatened. They're threatened with abandonment, physical harm. Sometimes they can be confined to certain places. They aren't allowed to go to school. And they can end up being harmed in a physical way as well. And they've got nowhere to report this. Now, in some of our rural communities, there isn't enough policing. Perhaps in the towns, there's more resources in terms of you being able to go to a police station and report an abuse case. But in the villages, there isn't much of those kind of resources, mostly because of the distances you would have to walk to find the nearest police station. So what can be done within communities to address that need, Ruth?
Communities should set up structures. There should be structures in the community where maybe we can call them support units to the police, because we need to police each other. The police will never be available to us 24/7. So if I have a neighbor whom I know is being abusive or is abusing a child or a woman, I should be able to approach this committee that has been formed and report this and gather the evidence, or then go to the police. There was a video recently of an aunt, my guru, who was living with a sister's son, and she was abusing this boy. She was physically abusing him, hitting him every day, throwing him down. It was such a heartbreaking video to watch, with a long stick, and like she was hitting an animal. So the people, then somebody took a video of it, and then of course your heart is breaking that you are watching this. You actually have time to take a video. Why can't you stop this madness? Why can't you stop this woman? But now, because of social media, the video circulated, and the police and social welfare got hold of it, and this woman has been arrested and the child taken into welfare. So, in terms of setting up structures in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, people need to take ownership and responsibility of each other, and of our own securities and of our children. When we're growing up, we always knew that a child was raised by the whole village. You never raise a child on your own. Everyone would contribute somehow into raising this child. So we need to go back to that Ubuntu philosophy, Ubuntu setup, where people are just looking out for each other. So if we were to set up structures within our neighborhoods, within our communities, and we say, if you hear anything, if you see anything, and then form a safe space for the children and the abused, whether it's women or children, to come and be able to report it, and know that once they've reported it, you are taking them out of that space and safe space, and you're putting them into some kind of a shelter, or one of the community members is then looking after them until the police takes over and the Ministry of Welfare, Social Welfare takes over. So re-looking at structures in our own, just the basic grassroots structures where we are policing each other.
Yeah, community policing, I think, is a powerful thing.
Mm.
You remember when we were implementing the project in Mazivisa, if somebody stole anything from the school, it was the women in the community who would catch that person, take them back to the school to return the goods.
Yes.
So, if everybody's eyes and ears are on the ground and we are observing what is happening in every household, I think that could be a really powerful way of leveling out the playing field in communities that don't have a police presence as well. I think
True. And
that's really important.
the communities know who, especially Mazisa, they knew, the women knew there were people that they suspected. You know, like that one is known for thieving. This one is known for breaking into people's
Mm,
houses. This one is known for selling illegal things or stolen things. So
goods.
they knew, and that's the same thing in communities. People know somebody knows something.
Yeah, yeah. Kathleen, what would you like to weigh in on that in terms of community policing?
Yes, community policing. I remember when we grew up, we used to have, you know, those communities where people used to safeguard the community, their area. They would always check what is going on during the night and check what is going on during the day and how safe the children were. But now I think with what is going on, poverty and everything, even those who police others, even those who check on others, they seem to be going backwards, and they are the ones who are now doing the whole thing of stealing or getting into people's houses because they know where and who has got in the place where they are safeguarding people. So
Mm,
mainly the top notch of it, I think, I mean, our government would start with enacting a law that really protects people and properties and corruption.
mm,
Because
mm,
without that law, things are not going to be any better. It is actually going to be worse than what we look at right now. Because we
mm,
have children who are now on the streets who are not going to school. So those children are going to end up being those children in the streets because they are growing up. A child is born and every day the child grows up. So
mm,
when he grows up without any education, any form of training, the child who is on the street, we don't expect to have a child who is going to know what is right and what is wrong.
mm,
So unless the law is actually put in place for the community to safeguard, so that when they do something wrong, they know they will be arrested. Because I know there's a post that I just posted on my timeline where a man was actually grooming 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10 years, 12 years. The other one was even 14. So you see, this is what happens. It's not when people talk about it, it's not something or a hearsay. These things happen even everywhere in the world. And
mm,
so on my timeline, this man says he was grooming 8-year-olds, teaching them how to, telling them they are beautiful. Some of them, they will tell them whatever they are telling them, and the child will do exactly what he's told because he's a child. So
mm,
unless the law catches up with that person, then you will see the wrath of the law that it takes its course because the law is there. But if the law is
mm,
not there, I don't see how that will help because even those who police others, they are actually doing the same thing.
mm.
So I don't know.
The other thing that's quite disturbing about most children in abusive situations, especially in the polygamous communities, is that the children are normally the property of the father.
Mhm.
Normally, women have their children taken away from them, or if you decide to leave, you can't leave with your children. And I'm pretty sure, Ruth, if you were to investigate further the story of this abused child, it's
Mhm.
probably the child of the second, the third, the first wife who has left. And that
Mhm.
child is left in a home with no protection from their biological mom. A lot of times, these kids are abused by the women in the household. They are treated as servants. They're
Mhm.
pushed around. They're punished. They aren't given food to eat. And just that denial of any basic decency children suffer when their biological mothers are not present. And
That's so true.
again, that's a big issue for concern, especially in polygamous communities where women might decide to leave and you're forced to leave your children behind.
Or if
So,
she dies.
or if she dies, exactly. So, what happens then to a child or a woman in that situation who's deciding to leave, doesn't have the money to take her children with her? You know, again, we have to put resources in our communities to help that woman find an exit plan or strategy. You know, sometimes you can't make a rash decision and leave immediately. Maybe if you are given a few cents to go and buy some groceries, you can pull out $1 here, $1 there, until you've accumulated enough for you to be able to leave with your children. That again is if you're not in an endangered situation, because we know that domestic violence is another issue. The intimidation that goes with being abused as an adult, let alone as a child. There's so many layers to the issues. It's not always one thing.
Can I weigh in with this one?
Yes, sure.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. You remember yeah, I wrote this on my book that I left my first son, and his father took him to take care of him, but he was married, and he had other children who were actually going to A schools, you know. They would be picked up by the bus and they'll go to school. My son would walk 3 miles one way to go to school on foot. And it happened that one day as he was walking to school, it was raining. And as it was raining, the stream was flooded. He didn't notice what he thought was at school. He'll be beaten if he's late. So he started running. He wanted to cross this flooded stream. Unfortunately, he was swept away. And when he was swept away, it was those headmen who saw him walk, being swept away by the rain, by the water. They had to follow the stream until he was wiped out of that stream. And they picked him up, took him to the police station, and they started looking for the parent for that child. Unfortunately, it was my child, and I wasn't there. He had a stepmom. And finally, when my sister heard there was a child who was swept away by the flood down the stream, she went to check whose child was it. It was my son. So this happens even in the most circumstances with stepmothers. With some of them, we cannot tie them in one string, but some of them they go extra miles to mistreat a child. But what they forget is the child grows. Even with that mistreatment, that child is going to grow and the child will remember those things. So my son went through that. And I can witness that. If at all you live without anything, your children will suffer most of the time. And most of the time they will fight. The men like in my case, my ex-husband fought for this child, not for me not to take him, but the law had to take its course. So what I appreciate is it was the law that actually looked at it and said, no, the child is going to go with his mom. So I was given the custody of that son. So this happens mostly in people, and then with us as well, we start thinking, what am I going to give the child? But you know what? With your child, you can give him anything. The child will grow as long as the child is safe, than leaving your child to be mistreated every time and every day.
That is
You,
so
you,
true.
you know, this issue reminds me of my mother, because my father went off to war, leaving a pregnant woman with 4 other kids, between the age of I was 3, my sister was I think between the age of 7 and 3. And then my mom was pregnant, but he went off to war. So my mom found herself back in the village with her in-laws, my father's family, and there was so much abuse and ill treatment and bad treatment against my mother. So she went to her family to seek refuge, to say, "Can I come back home? I need to come back home. We are not Garamushe. And her family told her, "It's fine. You can come back by yourself. You leave the children there." And because my mom knew the kind of treatment that she was getting, and we were getting when she was there, and she said, "No, I cannot leave my children." And she stayed. She stayed for the sake of her children. And so you can imagine if our mother had left, and we didn't have that covering and that protection, the kind of abuse we would have been subjected to. So when I look back and I think of the sacrifices that my mom made, or that a mother makes just to make sure that her children are safe, and I mean they're protected from this kind of abuse. So it is really hard. So when it comes into a situation where the man owns the children, as the setup is in our culture, that you can't run away with the children, because if you run away with the children, then the whole family will just turn against you, like, "Oh, she stole the children and ran away with the children," and it becomes a police case, and then people are actually witnessing against you, which is very sad, because I know that children need their mother. I mean, we all know that up to the age of 18, children are better off with their mothers, but it's just the way it is.
So what did your mom do, Ruth? How did your mom survive? How did she manage to cope during that time?
So my mom and my older siblings, we so what? So maybe five. No, the 7-year-old and the 9-year-old, and my mom would go work the fields. Maricho. They would go and work in other people's fields for food or for money. And then my mom would come to town because her family was in town. So we would then maybe come to town once a month, and she'll be selling peanuts, she'll be selling chairo, just as finding things to come and sell in town, and then would go back to the village. So she hustled in a sense. She hustled because the family took away all my father's cattle. They gave her, and I think they took away some of the fields. So she was only left with one field to work. And so whatever we made, we didn't have extra to sell. So it was just for subsistence because we only had one field.
Yeah, and that just goes to show the resilience of most women and the challenges they go through in situations like that when a husband or a partner is not physically present to protect them. Another terrible issue within our communities as well. So let's talk a little bit about intimidation and the different forms of intimidation that can be inflicted on children. Sometimes intimidation can be as simple as a gesture. It could be a look that someone gives you. Sometimes people just use their physical size to threaten children. And, when we were watching that little video clip yesterday with the apostolic faith father, and he started doing his crazy stuff and acting all. So people will use things like that to threaten the family. He was talking rubbish. The
Yeah.
googly gaw words that were coming out of his mouth, trying to pretend that he's invoking some kind of a
Yes.
spirit, or. So intimidation can come in so many different forms. And because this is obviously a man who's respected within the church, within the community, I remember one of my friends telling me an incident of an uncle who would start speaking English words. He would throw these English words into the so-called trance that he was in, words that they couldn't understand. Apparently, he would say things like sophistication, sophistication. And because they didn't understand what he was saying,
We
it
were
sounded like
intimidated.
he's speaking in tongues or, but these things are happening. They're very, very real. And so, especially when there's a layer of religion infused in there as well, it's even worse.
Yes.
Because now this is God that is speaking. God has given me this power. And he was holding his stick. You remember he had the stick on the
And
just that
even
stick,
shaking for the effects.
the special effects. We can laugh right now, but this is very, very real. And this is how people gain control and manipulate other people. It's
Yes.
a sad situation.
Especially if people don't understand for themselves who it is that they are worshiping or what it is that they are worshiping, and they're hearing it from somebody who professes to know it all, to have God
Yes.
spoken to them directly, and now they become a semi-god. They're like, you cannot
Yeah.
talk to God, you have to talk to God through me, and whatever I
Yes.
say goes because this is coming from God. And it's abuse, and I was reading something on Twitter this morning where an Iranian guy was telling his story about how religion was used in the 80s in Iran to manipulate people, to oppress and to subjugate people to suffering. And it's the same. It happens everywhere. People use religion to control people, to manipulate people, eh,
Yes.
to make them feel like they are lesser than
Then
they are.
yeah.
They become demigods, like they become
Mm,
like we are better than you, we are holier than you, and we know better than you, and then they use that power. So this kind of intimidation where power is imbalanced or unbalanced,
yes.
where somebody is using their undue influence and undue power,
Influence.
yeah,
Yes.
to choose. So it happens a lot in families where an uncle will just look at you with that eye that if you just open your mouth,
Mouth.
I'm
You're
going
in
to deal with
trouble.
you. Or they just go like, you know, if you just speak, I'll kill you, and
Mm, mm,
the child believes it that this person is actually going to kill me, and
yes.
they keep quiet. So that there is that form of intimidation, even in churches,
Mm.
all these religious setups.
And the unfortunate thing about children is that a child that's being abused by its parents doesn't stop loving his parents or her parents.
True.
They stop loving themselves. And this is why the abuse again perpetuates. This is why the fear of reporting on the parent steps in, the fear of ending up losing their parents or being separated from them. So a lot of children will suffer in abusive situations, too scared to go anywhere or tell anyone in the fear that they'll be taken away.
True. You remember we had a speaker in one of our summits. I think that it was the May summit, the Her Story summit, where
Mm.
he was talking about his father having abused his mom and him, and then the police
Yes.
came, and then the mom was like, "Do you want your dad to go
Mm.
away? You
To
want your dad to be
prison. Yeah.
arrested? You're going to drop the charges." And he ended up dropping the charges. And he said
Mm.
from that day, he kept quiet. His voice was silenced. He
Yeah.
just used to watch and see the abuse and go through the abuse, but he could not speak out anymore. He felt the police couldn't protect him, his mom couldn't protect him, and
Mm.
he was just silenced.
Yeah, it's actually quite tragic because the very people who are supposed to protect you as a child are your parents. And when your parents fail to do that, it must be the most disempowering feeling in the world. The two people who are supposed to be there to make sure that no harm comes to you. There's got to be
Otherwise,
very, very disempowering.
yes.
Yeah, so we've touched on quite a few things here with
Mm-hmm.
regards to child abuse and its many forms. Sometimes it can be physical abuse, it can be sexual abuse, it can be
Mm-hmm.
molestation. There's so many layers to it, but we need to find ways to give children the tools to be able to, one, identify that it's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important within the schooling system. You know, kids are getting sex education classes. Children should also be made aware of what is abuse in the home.
I,
Schools need to have structures to identify the signs of trauma in
yes.
children who are going through this.
I
Jump in there,
remember
Ruth. Sorry.
I remember when my son was in primary school. So they were teaching them about abuse, inappropriate touching, inappropriate actions or words, or not
Mm-hmm.
speaking to strangers. So they had a campaign that they called "Speak Up and Speak Out."
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody touches you inappropriately, they told them the places that no one should touch you, and nobody should their way you know your private parts, or they're fondling you, they're caressing you, and you feel like this is wrong. You must speak out and speak out. So I remember they had a song. Tabani would come home and be singing, "Speak up, speak out, speak out, speak out," and then you tell your mom, "We've been taught that if somebody does this and that, we must tell the teachers. Where we must tell either I must tell you, or I must go and tell the teacher at school." So that the schools must be encouraged. But we've also had cases where teachers have abused students.
Yeah, yeah.
So these perpetrators are in all sectors of society, and um, which makes it very hard sometimes as well. That how now do we, the people like the parents, we're talking about the parent not being able to protect, but they actually abusing the child. How now do we fish them out? How do we identify these abusers and take them out of society, or take them away from the children? And that, but I know definitely there are programs where children are being taught on how to report abuse, how to identify especially sexual abuse.
Yeah, it's very true. And again, these are people who are in positions of authority, who
Hmm.
use that authority to take advantage. A lot of times, the perpetrators will look for the children from the poorest families
Hmm.
and find ways to abuse them. They can entice them with maybe something to eat. You know, it happens in very, very subtle ways. I remember when I was in high school, one of my best friends was being sexually molested by a grown man. We were 14 years old. She came from a
Hmm.
very poor background, and it went on for years. And I remember one day she asked me to come with her to this man's office. She told me to wait outside. She went into the office, and then she came back about 30 minutes later with a $20 bill. You know, this is in the 80s when $20
Hmm.
for a child was a lot
Oh.
of money. And I remember saying to her, "Why is he giving you that money?" And I went home and I told my mother. My mother actually banned me from playing with that girl, not knowing that this was a kid who was being abused. The father
Sure.
was an alcoholic. He wasn't home. Mother was an alcoholic. Same story. There was no food at home. And so, whatever this man was doing, he was giving her money for it so she could go and buy
Oh
food. You know, it's those type of situations where
my
these
goodness.
pedophiles are everywhere. We hear about pedophilia in the Western world. It's got
Hmm.
a label, but in our communities, it doesn't have such a strong label. These are
Hmm.
people within the community who take advantage of the poorest of the poor in this way.
Yeah. Oh, that was sad, hey?
Absolutely shocking. I remember she ended up getting pregnant with this man
At what
and
age?
getting married off. We had just finished Form 4. So we would have been 16 years old.
Sure.
And she
My
got married
goodness.
to him. Yeah. So these things are happening. We've seen them happening all around us our whole lives.
Mm,
And I think we've kind of hit that point now where something's got to give, something's got to change.
mm,
And we want to be a part of that change. We want to be the change that we want to see in the world. So please, everybody who's listening to this, use your influence, use whatever resources you have, not just to identify the children within your communities that are needing help, but maybe you could be a school teacher. Maybe you are
mm.
aware of children within the school whose behavior has changed. Something has changed in their way of being. Help identify those kids and report some of these cases because it could be happening on the school ground. Sometimes it happens
Mhm.
amongst children themselves,
Cells, yes.
older children abusing the
Yeah.
little ones. It's not always
Mhm.
adults. It could be other children within the community who are the
Mm.
sexual abusers. And this is happening. It is happening
Yes.
all the time. So we really
So
want to take a strong stance against child abuse.
again, I think also within the schools, maybe set up a system of older sister, older brother kind of system, like where you just if we pay them off, if a grade 7 is paid off with a grade 3, grade 2, whatever, and just say, just watch her behavior, because when there is abuse, there is withdrawal. The
Mm,
child withdraws into themselves. They're trying to find protection, and they find it within themselves. They are quieter. They don't talk as much as they used to. They just lose this innocence and this childlike uh, aura about them,
mm,
and you start to maybe sense some pain, some, I don't know. It shows. It's only that we don't watch each other.
mm, mm.
We don't
Yeah, if you
watch.
pay attention, you can see the signs.
Mm,
If we pay attention, we can see the signs.
yeah.
Kathleen, do you have anything else to add in terms of different ways of combating child sexual abuse within our communities?
I'm muted, isn't it? Okay.
Now you're live,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, I think combating sexual abuse is going to take a lot of effort and laws so that everyone knows this is a boundary. If you cross over this boundary, you cannot, you'll be arrested or you'll be charged. So I think that's one. And two, parents as well should be aware of how the children are growing up, especially now it's with the social media as well. So parents should also be aware of how the children are accessing the internet,
Mm,
who are they associating with on the internet.
mm-hmm,
And if they are still young, also when they go to school or to places where they socialize with others, I think it's also a place where, as parents, should be aware who their children are also associating with when they are out there.
Mm,
Because many
mm,
times that is where the abuse comes in. And here they normally say abuse, especially when it comes to sexual abuse, it is caused by relatives in many cases. Those people you
yeah.
trust,
yeah.
those people you think they are brothers, they are sisters, they are sisters, they are the ones who actually perpetuate sexual abuse on children.
Mm. Yeah, it happens in clear view in your own
So I
home.
think with the law place, yeah, because you think it's a brother. Oh, my brother is here. We
Mm,
cannot do that. And also not to allow such things to go
Mm,
unreported. I think it's
Kath-
the most
Kathleen, your
mm.
connection
most
is breaking up
people
today. Your connection is breaking up. We are hearing every other word now. Yeah, I
I
think
think,
she's struggling with her connection. So,
yeah,
Ruth,
yeah.
what else do we want to add? What do we want to focus on tomorrow?
Tomorrow, I'm hoping to bring in the police. So today I'm going to try and get hold of the commissioner so that we just understand on from their end what is it that they are doing, as well as what kind of support do they need. Because I know sometimes when it comes to, if you've reported a crime, or you call the police station and they tell you, oh, we don't have transport, you have to come and get us, that kind of thing. So what challenges are they facing as they try to deal with these kind of cases? Because there is a lot of abuse happening in the country. There is a lot of abuse against children, against women, that is happening. But what I know also, when it comes to rape and sexual molestation, I know that the law is very harsh on the perpetrators in Zimbabwe. And once they prove that this has happened, they are very harsh. You get, I think the minimum sentence that people get is 8 years in jail for having abused, sexually abused a minor, or raped a woman. So we are really hoping to bring in the commissioner. We are also hoping to get in the minister of social welfare, because they are the ones that deal with when a child is abused. What is it that the state does in terms of providing a safe home or safe shelters for these children, uh, to take them out of that space where there's trauma, or how do they help these children overcome the trauma? What counseling services are available? I'll also try and reach out to Sasa Project and see if we could get a counselor who works with children, abused children, so that we also hear the kind of um, cases that they've dealt with and how they've worked at them. So hopefully this week we're going to have a number of other agencies that will come onto our show and just weigh with whatever efforts that they are doing in their own spaces.
That's wonderful. Yeah, it will be interesting. And, from there, we will also be able to create the relationships we're striving to create. So we can facilitate where we can, um, and complement
And
their
compliment.
weak spots wherever it is that we can be able to make a difference. So that will be good if that can happen. So I guess our call to action now is to anybody out there who's listening to this show. You know, child abuse doesn't just happen in Africa. It happens in every country at every level. So please pay attention to the children in your community. If you're in education, pay attention to the children who come into your class. The signs sometimes are not so clear, and sometimes they're right in your face and you can miss them. Sometimes the children manifest in bad behavior. If their behavior pattern changes, something is wrong. Sometimes it manifests in other ways, but if you are present to the children in your society, the children in your environment, in your neighborhood, in your family, it is something that you could pick up and potentially help a child who's very, very close to you get out of a bad situation. So it starts at home, goes into your community. And then if you have the bandwidth to help with the projects that we are initiating around the world, reach out to us. We need your support. We need your help. Right now, we're looking for as many educators as possible to participate in some of our fundraising efforts. So if you're a teacher, if you're a lecturer, please get in touch with us. The email is admin@herstorycircle.com. Admin@herstorycircle.com. Anything else to add, Ruth and Kathleen?
I think sometimes, when your child is acting out, listen to what they are not saying. Listen to what is it that they are not saying? What is it that's painful for them to say out? Because then identify this, talk to somebody who's professional, explain to them what's happening, and if need be, if you need to get your child, if you can afford it, if you need to get your child to a professional help, get professional help, take them and let them have an analysis done on them, or let them have sessions, and eventually they will speak. But we can just not look away when something is wrong. And as a mother, I think as a mother, we sometimes ignore our instincts, because we just know we are connected to this child. This child was in our womb for nine months, feeding through the umbilical cord. So there is that connection when something is wrong. And trust your instinct. If you feel that something is wrong with your child, ask them, sit them down. Don't because sometimes also as parents we become harsh, and we are like, you're just acting out, you're being a teenager here, I will not have it. But what is it that the child is not saying?
It's all
Listen to
about
that.
listening to the unsaid.
Yes.
Hmm.
True.
Excellent. Kathleen, are you with us? Are you back with us? Your parting thoughts for tonight? I think her connection
Yeah.
is causing her some troubles. Okay. So we will close our show today with those parting thoughts from Ruth. Listen to the unsaid. Sometimes it's more what's not being said than what is being said. And a lot of children suppress whatever stress or worries they have. So we'll be back again tomorrow with our show called The Power of Giving. If you would like to be part of the show, please either inbox myself or inbox Ruth, and we will add you to this panel. We would love to hear your views, would love to hear your thoughts. We want to bring together as many thought leaders who have a passion for education, who have a passion for children to participate. So have a fantastic day, everybody, wherever you are in the world. This is Gertrude Mache with the Her Story Circle TV and the Her Story podcast. Thank you, thank you, thank you for tuning in. And again, to my co-host, Ruth and Kathleen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Gertrude.
Bye
And
for now,
bye,
everybody.
everyone.